Record. All right, so I'm gonna keep it short today. It's been very intense, and I know you have a million things going on, but yeah, deadlines are deadlines, and in so many ways, the more we work now, the first month, if we get your project going in the right direction, the less frantic we're going to get later on in the semester when we actually approach those real deadlines. So that's why, right now it's the most, if you will, the most critical phase of your entire project. And the other thing is that I've been steering you guys towards the whole causality XY way of thinking, because once you clarify all those components in your projects, the rest will fall in place. Okay, it's slightly a counterintuitive way of thinking, but that's the basis of research. And like I said, if you have a clear identification of what you're talking about, the rest will just boom right there. So well, the other thing is that I'm still waiting on some work that is some folks are falling, well, they are either not aware they're falling behind, or they're not working on it. One or the other. I'm still waiting on some missed work, right? And it's up to you how you want to proceed at this point. And today is the 12th of September, meaning it's already a couple of weeks into the semester. So time goes by very fast. All right. So some of you seems like you haven't been looking at the Canvas page, or haven't really been looking at my announcements, or whatever material that I posted on Canvas. There's only so much we can do through this Zoom thing. So the process, most of it, you will really have to go on to Canvas and see what I've been posted and piece everything together, so that you know which direction to take for your project. Okay. Right. So and last thing is that it seems like several of you are still a little bit confused about what is a research topic and a research question. And again, if you think about research topic, it's a huge, if you will, the whole pie. A research question is a slice of it. And, how do you eat a piece of pie, or how do you eat a pie? You don't just stick your entire face into the whole thing, right? Instead, you slice up the pie into small sections, and then take little bites, and that's kind of the idea. And the way I've been thinking is to make sure that even though it might look different, the research question that you're working on, it might look different from your original research topic. But trust me, the way I've been thinking, I making sure that there is a connection between your original research topic and the actual research question. Um, for the most part, is some one policy, right, or one legislation, or one set of policy. And then I've been asking folks to think about a smaller part, one specific practice or one specific policy within the general thing, and use that as a way to design your entire project. And that's a more efficient way of dealing with this whole process. Okay. All right. So today I want to do two things. All right. Let's think about. Well, we'll revisit this very important idea later on in the semester, but I want you to start in finalizing and for you to gain a more complete understanding of your research question. I want you to think about the source of data. Right? And remember, this is your final capstone paper is a research proposal, meaning you are proposing, you're only proposing, you're not really collecting data, right? So in that case, it's almost like this imaginary exercise. Um, in so many ways, so remember 620, right? The group project, that's exactly what it is. You're not collecting data, but you're proposing how you would go about to collect data for to test or to work on your research question one way or the other. But that's exactly what it is, right? Your research, and I've been making suggestions in your exercise or in my emails, one way in different ways. But think about whom, right? In most cases, we're looking at primary data collection, proposing or suggesting primary data collection. And once again, we are just proposing whom, what type of individuals to collect data from, right? We're not actually doing it. So don't freak out on me, right? And I've mentioned that in a couple of projects, there might be some ethical considerations. But once again, we're not really working on it. We're not actually going through the process, but we're suggesting, well, be mindful of certain issues that we'll discuss in the final project or the final capstone paper. But the big question in having that complete view of your research question is that, okay, you have this research question, but how, where, and whom are you collecting data from, right? And in some cases, you are looking at entire agencies, but so not the individuals, staff member or program participants, but entire agencies, how they perform. So that would be your unit of analysis. Remember that concept, unit of analysis, right? So in that case, you're comparing different agencies or different collectives as the basis of your comparison. And in that case, you are collecting data at a different level comparing to individual level analysis. Most studies are looking at a process working on the individual level. Or if you think about it, how certain institutional policy affecting individual, right? So in that case, imagine if you have to, let's say, chit chat with somebody. Right? Research is a very intimidating term, but let's say if you need to talk to somebody, have a conversation with somebody who is in the know, somebody who is knowledgeable, who would provide you with information, in-depth information, right? In understanding the process or what is going on, whom would they be? Right? And that's kind of the process of identifying the proper source of data. And in that case, later on, when we write up the data and method section, right, whom are these people? What are their characteristics? And that is why in the last exercise, I asked you to describe your research population. I mean, some projects are a little bit different in nature, so that question doesn't really apply. But for the most part, we are talking about collecting data from specific individuals. And I want you to consider proposing or suggesting interviews, right? Interviews, using in-depth interviews as a method that you propose in your capstone paper. Right? Who are these people whom you want to interview in gaining understanding of a particular topic? And it's a relatively easy way to conceptualize, or having a very concrete idea of your research project, right? Or your research question. For instance, if we're talking about recidivism, right? whom should we talk to? Some kind of institutional process, and then recidivism. Well, you can suggest talking to former program participants, right, who are now released, who are no longer in the program anymore, and then conducting interviews. More, officially, of course, formally, we say those are interviews. But in your thinking, you may think of it as a kind of just a conversation, right? And that's easier for you to again conceptualize what it means or how the process actually looks like, right? As a matter of fact, if you take a look at the sample capstone paper that I posted, if you go to page 15, 16, 17, right, page 15. Right? If you go to page 15 of the sample paper, the student suggests using in-depth interview as a method in collecting data. So the third line, the qualitative method of in-depth interviews with key stakeholders. Okay, so I'm sure you are familiar with the term stakeholder, right? So you have to be quite specific in identifying who the stakeholders are in your project. And that's something that we have to do in the introduction section, right? But so that is helpful to think about it now and include that part in your introduction section, but later on further develop and discuss the characteristics of the stakeholders. So in many cases, in many projects that you're working on, think about interviews as a qualitative strategy, or if you want to have a broad coverage of many cases, right? Not just several individuals that you want to talk to, but hypothetically, and there's no right or wrong in this question. That's more of whether the method is appropriate or less appropriate for the study, and that's where I come in. When you propose something, and I'm going to tell you, well, this is going to work better, or this is not going to work that well, and you might want to consider something else. So if you think, usually certain type of studies, right? People in the know, right? Policymakers, there are quite a few of them, right? Key individuals. Who would they be, right? Implementing strategies, or implementing some policies, or decision makers, like from the top. There are not that many people from the top. So who would these people be? But the general rule of thumb is that if your question deals with a relatively small number of people whom you want to talk to, then a qualitative approach would be more appropriate. And in-depth interview as a qualitative approach, then something to really consider. But if you want to cover a lot of cases, right, which is fine, which is great, and especially if a policy, if an institution such as probations or corrections or public employees of an entire agency, then you're looking at a lot of cases. Then it might work better to think about a different strategy. Remember the whole survey thing, right? A survey. So, and you don't have to develop a full survey, okay? So in that case, survey questionnaire strategy, and later on, of course, if you remember 620, we quantify, right? We codify, we code the response, and we'll come back to that later. But in that case, if you are covering a lot of cases, then sending questionnaires to people, right? And that's something, once again, will be helpful in thinking about or in also making your research question a lot more concrete, right? Um, don't worry too much about access because we're not really doing it. We're just proposing that's how you're going to do it. And I'm here to help you to mention some issues that you might want to address in the final proposal, right? So yeah, think about the scale of your data collection. Is it more appropriate to collect data or talk to just a few people in the know that are involved in the decision making or who are experts, right? So in the case of the approved paper, then this person is suggesting only a few key stakeholders because the topic in itself or the research question, right? Competitive federalism, how it impacts economic development strategies. It's somewhat require some level of expertise that the general public probably doesn't really have much of a clue about what that means. So in that case, it's more appropriate to keep the interviews more limited and focused to include just the stakeholders. And some of your some of your projects are similar in nature, right? And then some, if we're talking about, well, one project, similarly, one project deals with public administrators using information technology to increase general public involvement. Well, yeah, you are looking at the issue from the point of view of public administrators, not the point of view of the general public. If the general public, if the point of view is from the general public, then of course you want to collect a lot of data, right, or cover a lot of cases. But in this case, you are looking at the question from the point of view of the people or the few people who are doing this, right, who are making these decisions and who are somewhat knowledgeable in using social media or some kind of information technology in increasing public participation. So that's more appropriate for a small scale, but more in-depth data collection method. But so think about it, really think about it. Think about whether your project is more suitable for a small number of potential informants or just small number of people you want to talk to, or a larger number of respondents. In that case, survey questions or survey questionnaires would be a much more suitable method. Once again, it's not wrong or right. It's more of a matter of the compatibility and appropriateness of using the proposing, not using, but proposing certain methods, okay? Generally, if, once again, if your topic involves a program or service that cover a lot of individuals, right? Like dealing with a homeless population or a housing population or low-income population seeking housing, generally you're looking at a larger sample, and that might be more appropriate to think about a survey questionnaire strategy in conceptualizing your research question and also working on your introduction section. Okay, that's something to think about. So what is the second thing that I want to address? Right. Before I move on, if you look at the method section of the approved paper, it's actually quite simple. It's only suggesting the major themes of what those interviews would cover, right? What you want to talk to your interviewees about, right? And of course, these themes should be informed by your literature review. What are some of the major concerns or major factors in that particular research topic or research question that you want to ask the interviewees. I think I know it's a very stressful process, but sometimes I think the best approach is to stick with simplicity, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to steer you guys towards, right? Every approach is about like how to do this with the most the least level of complexity, and actually being specific. That's I know it sounds contrary, but being specific is to keep it simple. Right? If you say, "Oh, I want to evaluate this one big issue or one big either law or legislation or policy," well, then it's actually more complex because it's vague. You don't know where to start. Right? There's no focus. There's no focal point. It's like one of those modern art pictures. You don't even know where to start with looking at the picture or the painting, right? Whereas, a very specific theme or a very specific question, the X and the Y, that's much easier for you to proceed in designing the rest of your capstone project. Okay. Right. So this approved paper, the method section, is a page and a half. That's pretty much it, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's actually quite succinct because she covers or the student covers who these stakeholders are and then what the student intends. Now, what the student intend to ask, right? The major themes. Economic development directors, manager from at least 5 cities, currently competing for tech giant Amazon's headquarters, blah, 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 right? And what this set of interview is for. So think about that, right? And well, that's why you are required to do a topic proposal, because the topic proposal gives you some idea of the boundary of the topic, right? And in that case, you can start to have some idea of what questions you might want to ask your respondents if that's what you want to do. Okay. All right. And let's go back to the introduction section. What you need to and remember, first draft is due on the 20th, so a week and 1 day. Right? And yesterday we talked about the worksheet, right? And highly recommend to use the worksheet to put together your introduction section. And yeah, let's take a quick look at what the student has done in the approved paper, right? Well, what is interesting about that paper is that do we need to submit? No, you don't need to submit the worksheet. If you want, you can send to me. I'll be more than happy to look at it and give you some feedback. But there's no need to submit the worksheet. It's better for you to just work on the introduction section and when you finish, send me the draft. If you look at the sample paper, right, it's kind of interesting. The first paragraph immediately. The first paragraph, right? It's all about public spending, how much money is involved, and she used actually a citation to begin the entire project. So that's a good way to start because boom, something with credibility, right? Something that's already been published and something that is recognized as legitimate. And then also she used a New York Times article to talk about how many states grant dollar amount and money talks. Right? Like I said, significance of it, talk about how much money, and also if it's not directly involving money, then talk about an agency, the scale, how big is an agency or program participants, right? Talk about the probations process in LA County. How big is it? How many people go through the process every year? And that's why you want to talk about, you want to focus on a specific topic and so on and so forth. And then the second paragraph, if you look at the paper, according to Kindleberger and Herrick, economic growth means more output, while economic development implies both more output and changes in the technical and institutional arrangements by which it is produced and distributed. Quote, definition, right? Defining what you are addressing. There are two things in her project, or two main things, competitive federalism and economic development strategies. So, well, first of all, what is economic growth? What is economic development? Right? Contextualizing and also providing definition, right? So think about that in your project. How would you provide some kind of context for your readers? And then she goes into describing her project. Yeah, her. The second page, this study focuses on findings about government's role in devising policies favorable for business investment given the public costs associated with these policies and the sufficiency of benefits stemming from their usage. Justify and think about connecting the significance or the dollar amount or why so important to your project, to your topic, right? And in this first part, she's mostly talking about the literature review, right? Which we're not doing that yet. Like I said, a lot of what you have done in the topic proposal, you can definitely take sections from your topic proposal and use it in your introduction section, okay? And right, and then finally, some details about the project that she's working on, right? So, like I said yesterday, I gave you the worksheets, but at the same time, it's not necessarily that it has to go in that sequence, right? Think about in what, but you should be mindful that all those points are touched upon, right? Not missing anything. But it doesn't necessarily mean that A, B, C, D, E in that sequence. Mix it up a little bit if you want. That's fine. Okay. And I also posted a link. About the writing style. Most of you seem to be catching on, compared to 620, most of you are catching on to this academic style writing, doing a pretty good job about using the more professional language. Keep on doing that. And just think about if you have to write a report, right, at your job. Many of you have to write reports, right? The language is kind of weird because it's really as if you weren't a person. Well, because they're trying to keep it objective without involving too much of your personal qualities or feelings or emotions or whatever, right? Just documenting the facts of incidents. Well, there's a similar idea when it comes to academic writing. Right? It's not personal. It's not about how you look at things, even though ultimately I know it's about how you as the writer, right, view these issues. But at the same time, it's more like an assembly of all the literature, all the research that has been done in composing that view. It's not just how you look at it. It's how you look at it based on all this work that has been done. Right? So it's necessary to scrutinize the writing a little bit to make sure that it doesn't carry any bias or it works in that more objective style of writing. All right? So take a look at the page, avoiding bias, right? And see if the words that you choose, it's counterintuitive. It's not very, it doesn't feel natural. But then again, you're doing research. It's not a natural act per se. Okay? Otherwise, I think the rest before next week is just to work on your introduction section, right? Because and yeah, you can restate your research question into a more for the sake of flow. Right? Does X increase or decrease Y? Well, it's not very flowy or literary. And yeah, it's fine if you want to rephrase it and then also include some elaboration on the topic itself. And that's the exercise that we've been working on. Okay. Yeah, I know 2 days in a row, it's quite a bit. And so that's why I want to keep this one kind of short and just give you everything you need to know to write that introduction section. Okay. Anything else? Is there anything else? Any questions? Well, no, because it's a different kind of. The short answer is no, but I'm not saying a bad idea. Right? There are some research strategies like participant observation or some action research, but it would be easier. Well, of course, you should use your experience or use your knowledge, right, to frame the argument, right? But your voice, right? Your voice, it shouldn't be in the front. The data that you collect from the research population, that is what should be front and center. Okay, but once again, you're only proposing that's how you're gonna whom you're gonna interview and what you're gonna talk about, and that part, right? What questions you want to ask. Hypothetically, if you want to interview the homeless population, then of course some of those questions should be guided by your knowledge, and some of those questions should be also guided by the literature review, right? So integrate all that stuff in forming the kind of questions that you might want to ask in either the interviews or the surveys or whatever it is. Okay, does that help? No, like I said last time, you can mention if you want to propose a hypothesis, which is not necessary, a research hypothesis. Generally speaking, only quantitative methods would, and it's not always, and if you read papers, a lot of papers don't explicitly state their research hypothesis in the paper itself. So if you look at the sample paper, right, there are definitely a couple of things that the student mentions. Her research question, okay? Not necessarily in the same wording, but there are different places in the entire. Now, take a look at the last paragraph in the introduction section of the sample paper. Right? This study strives to ascertain whether we can look to competitive federalism theory to posit expectations about public agencies' use of firm-specific tax incentives for economic development given existing research on the merit of the strategy. That's her research question. Okay? And not of course not phrasing it as x to y, because that's just an exercise that we've been working on to clarify what you are doing. But there's an example of where to inject your research question, right? The last paragraph of the introduction section, which is fine, or the first paragraph, that's fine too, right? It's just that somewhere in the introduction, it has to be quite clear what your research question is, okay? So yeah, you can state your research question towards the end of the section or in the very beginning. It's kind of this is the other one. It's kind of unnerving sometimes when you look into the screen and something is moving behind you. But anyways, yeah. So they like to be on camera, I guess. Everybody likes to be on camera. That's why people like selfies, right? What else? Yeah, use the worksheet. Definitely use the worksheet. Right? And then again, it's like building blocks. Once you have all the chunks in the worksheet, then just put the whole thing together and reword a little bit if you wish. Right? Um, I think in the writing process, the lack of organization, it's one of the biggest problems. A lot of times people just start to write without having an outline, right? And then they run into problems because they write themselves into a corner, or it becomes the writer becomes confused with what he or she is doing. So that's why having that outline, it works. And like I said, just boom, 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 and then what else? And don't forget, think about the research gap, right? What you can do, what you need to do to address the research gap. Um, we don't have to. I mean, we don't. We don't have to. It's not a critical issue at this point, but it's good to keep in mind, right? And mention the research gap. Remember significance, right? The significance of your research, and either the purpose or significance of research. You can talk about existing research and what is missing and what else. Okay. Yeah, keep me posted. And I'm trying to make sure that there's as much clarity as possible. And sometimes, like, I'm making comments that might not go with um, uh, that might not be consistent with what you've been thinking, or what you think you want to do. But I'm thinking down the road and trying to figure out the simplest and most direct way of getting this done, so that you all graduate on time and without with the least headache. So that's the thinking behind some of my comments. Okay. Anything else for now? No. Okay, then that's it for today, and I'll talk to you guys again next Tuesday, right? 6 days from now. Yeah, keep me posted, and those of you in most cases, my turnaround time is relatively quick, so that's what I'm trying to do, right? Because I know it's a very unsettling process, and you want some feedback, and you want some answers as quickly as possible. So I'm really trying to give you a short turnaround time. Okay. All right. So yeah, if nothing else, I'll stop here, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. Okay. Have a good night.